in the public hearing of the Joint Standing Committee on the National Broadband Network. The hearing is being held via a combination of video conferencing and teleconference. On behalf of the committee, I welcome everyone to today's hearing. For the benefit of the witnesses, we are joined by Deputy Chair Ms. Templeman, Mr. Simmons, Senator Griff, Ms. Phillips, Dr. Haynes and Senator Antic. This is a public hearing and a Hansard transcript of the proceedings being made. The hearing is also being broadcast by the Australian Parliament House website. I remind witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence to the committee. The committee generally prefers evidence to be given in public, but under the Senate's resolutions, witnesses have the right to request to be heard in private session. If a witness objects to answering a question, the witness should state the ground upon which the objection is taken, and the committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer, having regard to the ground which is claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request that the answer be given in camera. Such requests may, of course, also be made at any other time. A witness called to answer a question for the first time should state their full name and the capacity in which they appear, and witnesses should speak clearly to assist Hansard to record proceedings. I ask that all committee members and witnesses mute their microphones unless given the call to speak, to ensure that all questions and responses can be heard. If members experience connection problems during the hearing, please contact the Secretariat directly or through the WhatsApp group. To assist Hansard, I remind all speakers to state their name prior to speaking. With those formalities over, I welcome representatives of Compete. I understand we have Mr. Matthew O'Rourke, Public Officer, Ms. Michelle Lim, Chair, Mr. Vaughan Baker and Mr. Andrew Roberts. Thank you for taking the time to give evidence today. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses and evidence has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, could you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear today?
Yes, it's Michelle Lim, Chair of Compete.
Matthew O'Rourke, Public Officer of Compete.
Vaughan, Commercial Director for My Republic, which is a member of Compete.
Andrew Roberts, a member of Compete and the CEO of Field Solutions Group, a regional, rural and remote telecommunications provider.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I now invite you to make a short opening statement. At the conclusion of your remarks, I will invite members of the committee to ask questions.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just begin my opening statement. Compete is an industry alliance for competition in digital communications, representing non-dominant and smaller challenger providers. Founded in 2001, we were formerly known as the Competitive Carriers Coalition, and our members include niche regional providers, mobile providers, data centres and wholesalers servicing the 500 plus small telco businesses located across metro and regional Australia. Our submissions to the Joint Standing Committee represent the consensus position among our members, and as a result, there may be some questions during this hearing which we will ask to take on notice if there is no consensus view. Our representatives here today each have specific focus areas, so this may determine who will respond to the questions raised. Dating back to early 2000s, our predecessor organisation, the Competitive Carriers Coalition, strongly advocated for a wholesale-only, open-access national broadband network to resolve structural issues that were impeding competition in Australia. Today, Compete firmly believes and remains supportive of NBN Co's role in delivering a pro-competitive industry structure NBN's obligations to deliver services on a non-discriminatory basis, and NBN Co's role of providing better access to a broader customer base for our members as we continue to innovate in the next era of digital communications. An era in which basic connectivity is an essential service, one that should be ensured for all Australians, and which a growing plethora of new communication applications, such as video and collaborative communications, if supported by an affordable, fit-for-purpose NBN, will bring economic benefits and support significant changes in how we do things, what we can do, and of strategic criticality for the NBN, where they are done from. The NBN can augment daily lives.
Hello, it's Katie Allen.
However, there is a way to go before NBN strategy delivers on its original intention. The policy rationale behind NBN's inception was to end once and for all the core competition problem of essential bottleneck facilities being controlled by a vertically integrated incumbent. The challengers outside the big four vertically integrated operators occupy only 8.8% market share, according to the latest NBN market indicators. At three key points in time, 2013, pre-NBN build, 2018, midpoint of the rollout, and the latest June 2020 NBN market indicators report, Telstra's market share was 50%, 50%, and 46.4% respectively. Our collective experience out of COVID-19 confirms that an important codependency on interconnection with all other independent voice and mobile networks, and that the whole of the industry, that is, both big and small providers, all play a valuable part to support the Australian population. It also confirms our concerns about NBN Co's ability to meet future network capacity requirements at affordable levels. If NBN's success during COVID was largely pinned to the 40% CVC uplift at zero charge, we take that as a clear sign, as NBN Co's pricing approach is not adequate for RSPs to continue to serve a permanently changed demand profile after the 40% CVC charge waiver is withdrawn. Finally, Compete acknowledges the significant advancements NBN has made in the past 2 years. NBN's entry into the enterprise market is overwhelmingly positive for competition and must remain. To sum up, Compete submits NBN's target activations out to 2023 are not ambitious enough for regional Australia. NBN Co needs to increase transparency around how it is filling coverage gaps with complex connections and difficult to serve premises, and to convert premises passed into service activation. The additional 40% CVC pricing should remain permanent. There needs to be sustained economic merit for RSPs to sell NBN services while catalysing new products that are fit for purpose to embrace consumer experience demands for voice, streaming services, video and collaboration communications well into the future. Wholesale service standards need to be regulated by the ACCC's final access determination. With this in place as a regulatory backstop, NBN Co should do more to make its 700-plus page wholesale broadband agreement accessible and workable for challenger providers. A privatised NBN Co should continue to have its investment and ownership strategies restricted so anti-competitive incentives do not arise for NBN Co to discriminate in favour of a particular group of RSPs or participants in an adjacent market, or in favour of itself in competition with its RSP customer base. And finally, NBN's 5G strategy should be proactive and not reactive. NBN should throw its support and its spectrum holdings behind open access, neutral host technology. Many of these issues point to the fact that it is not yet time to start the ball rolling on NBN privatisation, nor declare the network built and fully operational at the end of this year. If this process is commenced prematurely without first resolving key issues, there is a risk of even further departure from the original competition goal. This brings me to the end of Compete's opening statement. We thank the committee for the invitation today and welcome any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lim. Colleagues, I make it 35 minutes a piece for the benefit of yourself, Ms. Lim, and your fellow witnesses. we seek to allocate time relative to each group within the committee. So that is the independent grouping, the grouping that represents the Australian Labor Party, and the group that represents the coalition. I'm going to throw first to either of Senator Griff or Dr. Haynes, and together you can share the 35 minutes according to your own requirements. Then to you, Ms. Templeman, and finally we'll round out with questions from coalition members. Over to Senator Griff or Dr. Haynes.
Thanks.
Right. Well, Dr. Haynes is fine. I'll kick off. Look, I'd like to go first, Ms. Lim, to your statement about target activations out to 2023 not being ambitious enough. What do you consider the targets should be? I might jump in there. It's Matthew O'Rourke. The activation targets are relatively low. I think they're around 70%, 72%, including over the forward 3 years. We tend to think that before there's any consideration for determination that NBN build is complete and operational, that perhaps the activation target should be raised. The expectation should be a bit higher. If the build continues, but the activation target remains at about 70%, that seems unduly low, given that one of those policy drivers behind NBN is to maximise utilisation. Building is not enough, access is not enough.
Mr. Baker, is it? Sorry, is it Mr. Baker?
It's O'Rourke.
I don't know. Oh, sorry, Matthew. Sorry, Mr. O'Rourke. I don't know about others, but your voice is coming in and out for me. I think the Deputy Chair just sent me a note saying she's experiencing the same thing. Is there some way that we can just get a clearer voice from you?
Yep, I'll hop out and come back in.
Thank you.
Thanks. Ms. Lim, if someone else could continue.
Sure, Andrew Roberts here. Look, I'll let Matt continue on the activation targets. I think one of the things that is key from our perspective is the activation targets represent premises passed. They don't talk about the type of service that is being delivered to that premises in detail. And especially when you segment the market into residential, small business and larger business, there's definitely an applicability of bandwidth requirements that need to be in place, especially as you talk about the replacement of voice services in an adequate way for a small business. So there's still a lot of confusion around the TC4 based product in the market and its applicability to provide quality voice services. So I think as we look at premises passed, by categorising them into residential, small business and enterprise, you'll get some interesting statistics out about how well the multi-technology mix and the rollout is actually proceeding, especially in areas that are underserviced in regional, rural and remote Australia. So just a small point, but some more detailed statistics on the rollout schedule, I think by type of business served would be a very interesting indicator.
Okay, look, until we get Mr. Baker back, I just might move on with some other questions. You actually reference that basic connectivity is an essential utility. I'm interested in your group's view. Do you believe it's appropriate for government to own or subsidise essential utilities?
Well, this is a very interesting question. Look, I mean, I speak for regional areas more than the metro areas, but I can tell you that those communities struggle enormously with communications, and the commercial or the uncommercial nature of mass builds has led the NBN to deliver Sky Muster into a lot of those areas because of the cost involved of the fixed line build out. But I think we've got to be very conscious of the fact that that's not an appropriate mechanism for a lot of rural, regional, remote Australia, especially when you talk about agribusiness and you talk about businesses that are located out there. You know, the NBN have done a stellar job in putting NBN fixed line footprint into small towns of 400 or greater people. But when you look at the footprint in the bush, a lot of the large businesses and enterprises are nowhere near those townships. And that would be a consideration I think we need to look at in terms of the applicability of what you mentioned, in terms of how we subsidise those people who don't get adequate coverage, thus have a substandard service.
I'm happy to add to that too, Andrew. It's Vaughan Baker here. The organisation that I'm a director of is My Republic. It's a small RSP that operates in 3 to 5 territories, including Australia, headquartered and originated in Singapore, and then launched a business in New Zealand, and then subsequently in Australia. And we also have interests in Brunei and Indonesia. The first 3 of those have all got government-funded NBN infrastructure. And we've launched businesses on the back of that infrastructure. And it's infrastructure deployed by governments because incumbent telcos are not interested in necessarily focusing on investment in infrastructure, and absolutely not in making it open access. So historically, telcos around the world have had an advantage of incumbency. They often start off being government owned and being the default provider. And they establish what we term a walled garden, where they become the vertical dominant player, and then they offer up parts of their access based on the tolerance or pressure from government from time to time to try and drive some competition to benefit the consumer. The investment that Australia has made is significant in the NBN, and I won't get into the wherefores on the quality of Australia's NBN versus the other NBNs that we operate on, but it is absolutely necessary infrastructure that would not have been built and would not have been made available to all players had there not been some government involvement. We're also talking about the potential in Australia for the NBN to be privatised at some point in the future. Should it be privatised, it's absolutely imperative that that infrastructure remains available on an open access and equivalent basis, i.e. that no volume discounts or advantages or favours to large players, in order for Australia to continue to benefit from the same level of ongoing competition. And you've seen various models. I'm sure the committee has looked at this, the differing models between Singapore and New Zealand, which are a couple of NBNs that have already been deployed, if you like, in advance of the Australian NBN.
Just in that regard, Mr. Baker, I mean, you obviously do have fears of privatisation, which a number of your members would. Do you see that bringing any benefits over the relationship or setup that you now have?
Well, the next issue with privatisation will become if there's further investment required to benefit the entire market, will the private owner necessarily invest of their own free will, or do they need to be compelled in some way to continue the investment? That's what I see as the risk. Obviously, the benefit is accessing private capital, but you can do that in many ways. The PPP approach, that the public-private partnership approach that was adopted in New Zealand, has been incredibly successful, with the private shareholder actually buying out the government, and reasonably successfully in at least 2 of the 4 cases where the network is not rolled out by Chorus. If anyone wants any background to that, I'm happy to delve into it. I was the former chief executive of the New Zealand Regional Fibre Group, which were the players that ended up being the 30%, got the 30% of the contracts in New Zealand that weren't awarded to Telecom New Zealand, that subsequently became Chorus.
Yes, I think that would be useful if you'd like to provide that to us on notice. If government provided perhaps a construction subsidy or ongoing subsidies, would that allay some of your fears?
Yes, but what's incredibly important is how the conditions placed on it. So we've got issues in Australia and around the world actually around government grants and government subsidies and investments into telco infrastructure, because many of those countries, just like Australia, they're focused on the NBN and then they're now starting to look at other stuff around the edge. So I understand you've got your own mobile black spot funding and so forth. One of the things that Compete is in favour of is making sure that any funding is able to be accessed by all. What we mean by that is that all retailers can actually take advantage, because that's where your product and service innovation comes from a lot of the time, is from the small challenger who's trying to gain market share. And we don't think it's appropriate that that funding just goes to one player or one group of players. So for us, it would be very much the placed on such a continued investment.
Okay, and obviously the importance of government introducing a regulatory framework around the NBN prior to any form of privatisation.
Absolutely.
Is there anything in particular other than what you actually mentioned that you consider should be included in such a framework?
Look, from my perspective, it all comes back to those fundamental principles of open access and equivalence of inputs that I'm sure your policy people would absolutely be all across. So as long as those two are preserved and maintained, then then retailers can compete. Right.
I mean, you specifically raised in your submission concerns over InfraCo requiring NBN. Are you concerned about specific actions that relate to InfraCo that could take place?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm sure others in the group may be closer to InfraCo and their plans, but I think obviously where our concern stems from is simply the infrastructure division of Telstra. The NBN was deployed and built because of the inaction of Telstra. So we'd be very concerned about, would be sort of potentially sort of rolling, going sort of back to the future, if you like, as far as the practices potentially conducted by that organisation should NBN fall into Telstra's hands. That said, though, in theory, that risk could be managed. But I personally perceive the risk to be greater where the NBN falls back to the incumbent, without achieving true structural separation. In New Zealand, they've managed to achieve it by forcing Telecom New Zealand to structurally separate in order to participate in New Zealand's NBN. And I'd be looking for something similar as far as InfraCo's split out from Telstra. You need to have full structural separation, i.e. the infrastructure provider cannot retail in any form, and also particular focus on what assets remain in the infrastructure company and indeed in the combined NBN InfraCo. So in the past, what these organisations do is they intentionally exclude their mobile assets from such a venture, and you need to look out for other types of assets around the edge of that NBN infrastructure that may cause competition issues that maybe the challenger retailers can't then get hold of necessary infrastructure.
Right. Could I ask if any other members of Compete have any comments they'd like to make about the regulatory framework?
Yes, look, it's Matthew O'Rourke again. Hopefully you can hear me a bit better. I'm competing against some homeschoolers from Melbourne. Look, I think there probably needs to be a thorough examination of the regulatory framework before there is any transition to privatisation, because obviously the future scenarios there are going to be quite different. So I think there needs to be a thorough fit for purpose assessment, and we'd probably expect that to occur during the Productivity Commission review stage. That would be part of that process. So I think short answer is yes, there probably does need to be some augmentation of the regulatory framework in order to set something fit for purpose for the long-term future. We don't necessarily have all the ideas ready to go today.
Okay, all right, thank you. And I just have one brief question. I think my time is running out. I'm interested in your view on the fourth version of the wholesale broadband agreement, particularly in relation to connection and fault rectification, timing and rebates. Are your members satisfied with this new agreement, and will they pass on the bulk of any rebates to end users?
It's Michelle Lim here. So I understand the ACMA is actively reviewing and just released their inquiry into the level that rebates will be passed through to end consumers. But in terms of your question for the WBA, we support the ACCC resuming the process for the final access determination. In regards to the metrics on operational assurance and rebates, as well as delivery, we believe that the current status is not adequate, and that the performance objectives set out in NBN Co's WBA are just not appropriate moving forward, and it does need to be reviewed based on that ACCC final access determination. I can go into some more detail in relation to that, but it is related to the minimum service standard commitments from MBO and what we think they should be, and just the measurements of how that is done across the entire customer base. There's a whole raft of different measures where we believe that in order to be able to provide certainty to customers, as well as being able to manage that consumer experience, that we do believe that it needs to be assessed by the ACCC under the FAD, and especially prior to any new WBA4 is committed to. In relation to WBA4, I understand that NBN Co has provided some response to the concerns raised by the ACCC, and that's under the inquiry which is run at the moment and just launched yesterday by the ACCC to resume that FAD process, which was held off prior, just when COVID came about. So Compete looks forward to the outcome of that inquiry, and we certainly believe prior to the signing of WBA4 that we do require the ACCC to review those metrics and key metrics on behalf of the industry, particularly given that the challenger providers and many members of Compete do not have that negotiating power with NBN Co, particularly since the WBA4 and the WBA3 and 2 and 1 are all over 700 pages. So we do welcome ACCC's involvement in the process.
All right, okay. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent. Thank you, Senator Griff. Dr. Haynes. Do we have Dr. Haynes?
You might not be unmuted.
Dr. Haynes?
Just so you know, Chair, her mouth is moving, but we're not hearing anything.
Can someone quickly click her a note on WhatsApp? I'll click her as well, please.
I think, Dr. Haynes, you can hear us, so you know we can't hear you, don't you? Yes, she's nodding.
I wonder if Dr. Haynes could drop off and jump on the teleconference. That might on the telephone. Dr. Haynes, perhaps, Madam, sorry to do this to you, Madam Deputy Chair. I wonder if you begin your questioning and we can double back to Dr. Haynes.
Is that all right? Okay. Well, I might ask Ms. Phillips to start the questioning.
Excellent.
We'll try and keep note of the changes in times.
I'm keeping a good note. You know me. So you should know me well by now.
All right, over to you, Ms. Phillips.
Thank you. Look, I've just got some questions around pricing, and Ms. Lim, in your opening statement, you were talking about the 40% boost in CVC capacity. I just wanted to know, obviously during the recent COVID lockdown, NBN Co gave retailers that 40% boost in CVC capacity at no cost, and that doesn't appear to have really impacted NBN revenue in any sort of material way. What do you think that tells us about CVC pricing?
Well, as a whole, CVC COVID or no COVID period, Compete is of the position that it should be abolished. However, what I will do is point to the fact that when the COVID period commenced, the immediate response was to increase CVC capacity by 40% at zero charge. And that was welcomed by the industry and by Compete members. But in terms of the actual cost base from NBN, and that really does point a few questions. And I think it leads to a bigger question of really how should CVC be accommodated? Should it be accommodated at all? And Compete is of the position that CVC should be abolished. And what I will do is I will ask to Mr. Baker to continue this discussion on CVC as well as that 40% boost during the COVID period.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's Vaughan Baker here again. Look, no other NBN in the world has a consumption check. So Australia's unique in that regard, and we understand how it came about in the sense that NBN sort of seeking more revenue, how to sort of charge more for its network. But a layer 2 network is typically not charged on a consumption basis anywhere in the world. So they generally have an ABC only type model where you pay for the tail access, and then your throughput you pay further along the network. That's our logic and rationale for wanting to see the CVC abolished. That said, though, as Michelle put, NBN immediately increased capacity for free to RSPs, anticipating the impact that work from home was going to have on the network. And we saw that in other parts of our network. So as retailers, we needed to upgrade the core parts of our network to connect with the rest of the world immediately on the back of work from home. So it was very welcomed that NBN were able to do that. But you raise a good point that they were able to do that, straight away. There was no consequence. I've done some analysis on what the likely impact is of if and when that 40% COVID-related additional CVC capacity is removed. If retailers were paying for that, depending on the extent to which throughput in their network and how hot their networks were running, the additional cost to them when that 40% comes off is anywhere between 2.5% and 12% increase in their overall NBN cost. Now that may not sound like much, 2.5% to 12%, but it actually is considerable. And the reason it's considerable is because the cost of goods sold for a retailer that's largely reliant on the NBN. NBN costs make up typically about 80 to 85% of anyone's cost towards gross margin. So that then potentially translates in an increase in retail prices of between 2 and 10%. So what we're possibly going to see is that if that additional capacity is required by retailers to maintain the same standard of service, we will see retail prices increase. And indeed, you have seen already a large challenger preempt that with a move of increasing its retail prices by up to $10.
So just going on from that then, so I guess what objectives do Compete consider NBN pricing should be designed to achieve? And I guess I'm interested in the views of Compete members whose, I guess, primary participation is in residential markets.
So look, I think it's we're in a strange situation where, because of the CVC charging, there's a consumption charge that doesn't encourage retailers to offer the best quality service. And that's because of the consumption charge that goes to the wholesaler. If there was no consumption charge going to the wholesaler, and obviously if an AVC only pricing model would have a higher AVC price. But the point is, you wouldn't have the wholesaler clipping the ticket on the consumption. It'd be other parts of the downstream network where the retailer would be paying for that. And it would provide the retailer with a point of differentiation. So the retailer that runs the networks can entirely open and sort of full speed and on the time reliable and available and able to sort of burst, they'd be able to differentiate. Whereas now what you've got is NBN have consistently tried to negate the impact, if you like, of having CVC charging. So you will have seen the pricing that they have for plans where they've started to bundle CVC in. Now, the bundling of CVC is trying to negate the impact of the CVC itself. But the problem with bundling CVC is it's at a point in time. And as we know, like all technology, everything grows exponentially. And what you saw at the time of COVID is nobody anticipated COVID. Nobody anticipated everybody working from home. And therefore, they didn't have enough CVC in the bundles. So they needed to throw more CVC in. If you took CVC out altogether and they just ran the network, the entire network, and optimized it the way that it's run in Singapore and in New Zealand, where it needs to be always on, always available, and it was AVC only, then the retailers would be the ones that would purchase the backhaul capacity, which is the interstate and between city type capacity, and the international traffic and the peering and the caching, in order to optimize the experience. And you'd have consumers choosing, which retailer was providing them the best experience, as opposed to NBN commoditizing all of that and then being the problem for the contributing challenge of running an unencumbered network.
So just going on from that, and we might have covered that a little bit already, but I just want to ask it anyway. What legitimate challenges do you consider NBN pricing presents for retail providers, and what incentives does this create?
It's the variable charge, so the fact there's a variable charge in there, so if it's like yourself. So I'm sure many of you have your home connection, and some of you will have gone to providers, or many of you will have gone to providers that offer unlimited plans. So you have the benefit where you don't have to worry about how much fixed data you're consuming at your home. We do. Because NBN tells us, so we have to manage the throughput, but it's worse than that. It's not the amount of data, it's the speed of data and the throughput. So we're paying for the speed and the bursts. Yet the reason we offer these unlimited plans is we think that we want to offer that peace of mind as a point of difference. And that's really gained hold. I think there's probably about 3/4 of the plans in the market are kind of unlimited now. So it's very unusual to kind of see data caps. But you've essentially got a situation where you've got the retailer in the middle getting squeezed both ways. The expectation from the residential consumer is that it should always be on, it should always work, particularly in these times where many of us are working from home. And then you've got the wholesaler, who typically around the world doesn't charge its consumption charge, but in Australia they do. It's further sort of margin squeeze for us, and it's a variable charge. So we would be advocating that there be a single fixed charge for access. Because once NBN has built the network and continues to maintain and upgrade it, that doesn't cost them any more money for the data throughput. You may hear them talk about the componentry that they put on the end to handle that, but that componentry is upgraded every 2, 3, 5 years, depending on what it is. And technology keeps advancing so it can handle that throughput. So the consumption charge and that data having a cost is a little bit of a misnomer, because you're seeing it yourselves as retailers, as consumers, where you're able to receive an unlimited plan.
And Vaughan, I think it's worth also adding that it also derives a quality issue for consumers. So we don't get to give consumers the best possible service.
Yes, so Andrew, you're quite right on that, is that what tends to happen is you've got retailers worried about the size of their CVC bill each month, and they'll throttle and shape the experience for the consumer because of that. You know, so the rest of the world, My Republic in Singapore and My Republic in New Zealand, we don't have to worry about that.
And which, as a challenger organisation, means that the larger ISPs in Australia get a lot more advantage out of economies of scale than we can as a smaller provider. So it definitely is something that needs to be looked at.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you.
Sorry, it's Matthew O'Rourke. If I could just add one more comment there. Your original question, Ms. Phillips, I think, raised the issue of costs. The incremental cost to NBN of providing additional CVC capacity is effectively zero. It's already built the capacity, it's just deploying it. And I think the only cost of the additional 40% that's been provided has been the revenue foregone. And I think public reporting suggested that was about $80 million. But in actual cost terms, the cost is marginal. And this has been recognised since the very beginning. The original McKinsey report documents this as well.
Chair, it's the Deputy Chair here. I can see that Senator Haynes has communication, so we might hand back to Senator Haynes to pick up her question.
I think just before we do that, I think, Madam Deputy Chair, the safest thing to do is for you to proceed. Just easier for me in terms of managing the time. I've got Ms. Haynes' allocation, and I'll give it to her after the ALP allocation ends. So I think it's best if you proceed.
If you prefer to do it that way, I'm happy to continue. Can I ask, just in terms of the picking up or continuing with the pricing question, in what way would NBN pricing better support social inclusion and take up objectives? Where does that fit in the mix?
Well, look, one of the overarching drivers of NBN is obviously to provide that platform for the economy to flourish, for consumers, for businesses, for the entire economy. And so usage is really key to getting those benefits. And pricing is key to making sure that usage is encouraged and affordable and taken advantage of. So the incentives created by the pricing structure really do go to whether or not the objectives of NBN are going to be achieved in the long term. Look, I think Vaughan is indicated about the pricing structure and the problems with a variable wholesale charge, given trends in the retail pricing. So the long term success of NBN, the pricing structure really needs to be rethought and restructured completely.
And have you looked at the issue of social inclusion at all in your analysis of it?
No.
Okay.
I maybe comment a little bit on the social inclusion piece. So in New Zealand, uptake is sitting at around 80%. So 80% of the population have taken the service now, and that's without the compulsion offered by forced migration. Where the old network in Australia is turned off 18 months later. It's simply been on the fact it's commercially attractive and it's better performing. So it's fibre to the premise and it's commercially attractive. We've seen in New Zealand large people all across the entire spectrum of socioeconomic sort of factors of people taking up the service, because it's now starting to be seen as an essential utility, just the same as electricity is. And so people are prioritising that. But of course, the flat rate charge from the wholesaler assists with that, because it means that if you want to, if somebody doesn't want much throughput on it and performance-wise, that retail price can be very close to the wholesale price. And then if somebody wants the faster performing service, they can then pay more for that. So I think the simplicity of the wholesale cost structure is important. And then what you're offering, as far as the service is concerned, needs to be better than what it's replacing, because otherwise, why would people move to it? And we've seen that be adopted right across the socioeconomic spectrum in New Zealand. From time to time, over the top, there'll be incentives and programs run to incentivize people to get themselves connected. But that's more an education play or a one-time type, in particular areas, particular suburbs or particular regional communities, to say, hey, did you realize you've got this? And the connection is free. You can connect to it for free, and it's much better than what you had before. And the cost is either the same as what you're paying today and it performs better, or if you want to pay more, you can get an even better service again. So sorry, I just thought I'd bring my perspective to another market.
That's great context. And does that mean when you look at the mixed delivery mechanisms that we have, that when you're saying whether it's a better service, I get feedback from my constituency where we have SkyMaster, and that they don't feel that is a better service, that they would rather stay on ADSL. Now that's what's coming to me from my community. Is that a view that you would see some rationale to?
Yeah, there certainly is some rationale. I'm not by no means expert in the area of satellite broadband. We don't offer that. But what your constituents are probably seeing is that on the old ADSL infrastructure is that it's more reliable, so there'll be less dropouts than maybe there are on satellite. But that really comes down to how NBN operates its satellite access infrastructure, and what congestion there is in the quality of that service. But just from a pure, when I look at Singapore, that's running at 95 to 99% uptake, New Zealand that's at 80%. The wholesaler and the retailer have partnered to make sure that the new service is better than the one it is replacing, because otherwise, why would people move?
Yeah, indeed. So can I ask, of the different NBN, the mix that's available with wireless, with FTTN, with FTTC and FTTP and HFC, and satellite, I don't know if I've left one out there. Would you consider that all of those should be, if they're running effectively, a better option, and then the affordability would be another issue, just across the country based on what your members are saying?
Well, there's this challenge. You're kind of leading me into comment on the mixed technology approach, and I think obviously, our business in New Zealand. In New Zealand, the majority of our customers are on FTTP, and some legacy customers that are in that 20% that are yet to convert are on VDSL, so FTTN. In Singapore, it's entirely FTTP. We see that FTTP is the best performing of those access infrastructures. And then after that, depending on who you believe and who you argue, the next best performing will be either HFC or FTTC, and then you've got and then the others follow. I think in Australia there's a real challenge where the FTTN is not necessarily any better than what it's replacing, and particularly when there's a period of I've forgotten what it's called in Australia, but you have both Telstra running the copper and NBN running the copper. Those two coppers interfere. So for the first, you have a period of time when somebody moves across to FTTN from maybe infrastructure that's previously provided by Telstra FTTN, move across to NBN and actually receive an inferior service on similar infrastructure to what they had before for an initial period until the Telstra component is turned off, and then it improves. So the mixed access technology does present quite a few challenges. And unfortunately in Australia, you now have some haves and have-nots. And that's why you now see NBN management talking about the fact that, their build work is not completed. They need to keep going with the build. What they mean by that is they're going to continue to upgrade those poorer performing access technologies in order to deliver more and more of the high speed tier services.
And I think it's also fair to say, Andrew Roberts here, for regional Australia, when you have got Sky Muster, you're stuck to a certain speed tier. That's it. And being a totally shared service across the satellite platform, it isn't appropriate for businesses of any major scale or larger households to use effectively. So you are disadvantaged a certain or large percentage of footprint in Australia based on Sky Muster. Having said that, it delivers ubiquitous access, absolutely. But when you're looking at population shifts around COVID into regional areas, if you don't live in those townships that are serviced by the NBN fixed line footprint, and in some towns, you're talking about a metre. So if you're on the wrong side of the road, you're on Sky Muster, whereas you can look at your neighbour watching his Netflix next door, and he's got a beautiful, nice fibre to the node connection. So it really is an interesting issue in terms of the social inclusion. But I think for regional areas, it's access first, then social inclusion. I think it's, not having the access leads to the lack of social inclusion.
Yeah, thank you. And Mr. Roberts, it doesn't even need to be in a rural area. I've got constituents only 60 or 70 k's from the CBD of Sydney, whose only option is satellite. So yes, we share your pain. Can I ask about the concessions that NBN has announced as part of the fourth version of the wholesale broadband agreement? Are you satisfied that those proposals create an adequate service level framework?
It's Michelle here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I think in terms of it was a question on the WBA4 and whether we believe that's an appropriate service framework. Yes, so we don't believe that the service framework around the WBA4 is adequate. As I said previously, we believe that there needs to be some measures in place to ensure that there are minimum service standards and that we can commit as providers supporting and responsible for the experience that our customers have on the NBN network. We believe that we need to have metrics around individual service experience and minimum standards in all of the key metrics. And as I mentioned previously, that is where we are supporting the ACCC's review of the WBA3 and the proposals under the ongoing negotiations for WBA4. And we look forward to reviewing in more detail the recently released response from NBN Co to the ACCC's request around some certain metrics.
So in terms of the specifics of the proposals as part of that fourth version, what are can you just go into a bit of detail about your concern about those? And then I might pick up on some of the things you just mentioned there.
Sure. So the performance objectives set in NBN Co's WBA are not backed by minimum service standard commitments, and we think they should be. Where there are minimum commitments, they are often measured based on NBN Co's performance averaged over an RSP's entire customer base. For example, NBN Co's commitment for performing remediation work if an ordered product is not achieving NBN's own committed minimum line rates for the relevant technology, under the current WBA provided the case is accepted by NBN Co. NBN Co only commits to completing a standard or custom solution for that premise within 2 years of the date that NBN opens the remediation case, and only commits to meeting the timeframe in 90% of the total cases raised by that RSP. And so that's under the Ethernet product module service levels. Further, we also can go through in terms of network availability and fault rectification. But NBN does not, under its WBA, commit to an order acknowledgement within a specific time frame after placing an order. So there's no service level around the initial order review timeline. And NBN Co's service level commitments don't commence until NBN Co has issued an order acknowledgement. So there are quite a few other items. I can keep going on. Network availability targets are expressed as operational targets only and can be unilaterally amended by NBN Co over time. Measuring whether NBN meets those targets, any downtime because of planned outages, modifications, activations or installations, permitted interruptions, they must be excluded from the measurement. And so no commercial rebate is available if the network availability targets are not achieved. And that is in the NBN Ethernet product modules. And in terms of fault rectification, if NBN Co does not rectify faults within timeframes committed, NBN Co only pays RSP rebates calculated on the degree to which NBN Co fell below its target to meet confirmed timeframes in 90% of the cases for that particular RSP in any particular month. So in other words, there's never really a service rebate available for the first 10%. And again, that's in the Ethernet product module. So just in summary though, most RSPs have no bargaining power against NBN. The WBA is 700 pages of detail, and that most RSPs don't have, particularly challenger and non-dominant providers, don't have time or the resources to master it. And that makes it almost impossible for most RSPs to influence NBN service standards or ensure that WBA commitments are actually fulfilled. So there is a lack of and an imbalance in the ability to influence the actual terms of which the WBA 3, 2 and 1 and now 4 include. And that's a concern to compete, because that does mean that we do not have as much control over the level of customer satisfaction which we deliver to our customers. And in terms of our customers, as a whole, you know, we extend a broad spectrum of the telecommunications sector, and this is from residential to small business, enterprise and government. So it's very key, and it does affect the whole Australian population. The NBN is very important, but also customer experience and actually managing those expectations. We see that that's something we're accountable for, but the concern is that at the moment we don't have as much control or an adequate amount of control to actually be able to deliver what we want.
So you've made it really clear that you prefer the mechanism to be a legislative one. So why do you believe that that is a better option than the wholesale broadband agreement?
Sorry, I missed the first part of your question. Could you repeat that?
You've indicated that legislation is potentially the preferred mechanism. What are the benefits? You know, why is that a better option? And I guess because what I'm wondering is, doesn't the industry agreement provide for a more appropriate balance between the interests of NBN Co and the interests of retail providers?
Well, it is the process that is involved in negotiating the WBA, and we are now in our 4th round of negotiating WBAs, and we haven't seen significant improvement in terms of the actual result of the terms of those arrangements. So Compete does encourage the Joint Committee to inquire into NBN preparedness to amend the service delivery and service quality commitments in the WBA in order to deliver on NBN's own commitment to improve customer experience. And that's noted in the corporate plan as a key risk. And you can refer to that on page 57. But Compete also encourages the Joint Committee to inquire into whether NBN Co is committed to improving the accessibility of that for smaller RSPs as part of that process. But in the meantime, we see the ACCC's proposed FAD as a necessary backstop for now. But really, you know, to your point, ideally NBN Co should proactively be simplifying and enhancing its contractual offerings and meeting those guarantees or meeting a guarantee that's what we as an industry, NBN and consumers see as adequate but we're not getting at that at the moment. And certainly the ACCC's intervention to represent as an aggregate the industry and the concerns of the industry is well received. And so if that process where the WBA4 does lead to adequate outcomes, then maybe the ACCC's involvement is not as required. But certainly as we move to the end of the operational phase, and it's unclear as to what might happen in terms of privatisation or ownership in the coming period, I believe and people believe that having at least some minimum service standards, which we can move forward with and we have certainty, irrespective of changes into the future, is something which should be well looked at and is certainly well received.
But, and
excuse me, Michelle, it's Vaughan Baker here. I'd just like to add something to what Michelle was saying as well. The service standards are incredibly important because that's the experience that people are having as they move across to this new infrastructure. So what I have seen in both Singapore and New Zealand is I have seen involvement from government agencies. So in New Zealand, it was an entity called Crown Fibre Holdings who put the contracts in place with the wholesale providers that subsequently became Crown Infrastructure Partners. And they represented the interests very much of the government shareholder and also obviously of the constituent community as well around the service standard that was put in place. And I'd suggest that we've got a real risk here where there's a prospect of infrastructure competition to NBN, future competition around 5G, and you've got providers of that 5G service being the most powerful RSPs in that negotiation with the NBN. So unlike the retailers that don't have an infrastructure alternative to NBN, they're not the ones negotiating or with the loudest voices around those service standards. So there's a real risk that if those service standards are inferior to the standard of service potentially available or provided by a 5G service, then NBN's potentially doing itself in the eye. So that's another reason that we're very keen to have some independent involvement in that negotiation to make sure that those service standards are fit for purpose and do deliver on the promise and ensure that NBN is viable infrastructure going forward.
And further to that, it's Michelle Lim here. Prior to the NBN, Telstra as the incumbent owned 50% of customers. Today they own about 49%, if I was correct from the figure that I provided in the opening. And the challenger market has a small line share of the overall base. But we've got to look to, I guess, the incentives and the motivation behind providing excellent customer service. And, if there's a consistent and there is no competitive pressure in terms of churning away or losing that customer base, I think there is not as much incentive or priority, perhaps, is the better term, to ensure that there are consistent standards which are managed over time and that the whole industry is aware of what those standards are, as well as consumers.
So can I just be clear then? So your submission indicates that you do think that legislation is preferred above the current mechanism. Is that Compete's position?
Yes, that is Compete's position.
Great.
If I can, Andrew Roberts here. It's a very interesting time. We've mentioned 5G emerging as a fixed line competitor in certain areas, but you're also seeing state governments now wanting to step in and start building their own mini NBNs. New South Wales Gig State is a classic example of what could be a large network build, which if we don't have a common legislative set of service standards, we're going to see a two-step service delivery and service provision, and at the end of the day, service quality construct emerging in Australia. So yes, we have to be aware of the large telcos, but state governments are now very active in trying to build their own telecommunications networks. And I think without ACCC delivering the baseline, call it that, about what a consumer has to receive, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice.
Chair, I have one more quick question. I think it's a quick question. Just what reflections...
Well, it'll need to be very quick.
What reflections can you offer on smaller broadband providers who've been seeking to bundle energy services in with telco offerings?
Compete does not have a position on that yet, but we can take that on notice and come back to you.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you for that. To you, Dr. Haynes, I trust we have the technical issues resolved, and you can proceed for 20 minutes or so.
Thank you. And can everyone hear me all right now?
Yes.
Great. Thanks very much to our witnesses. I just want to draw you back, please, to your opening statement in regard to NBN's target activations out to 2023 are not ambitious enough for regional Australia, and NBN needs to increase the transparency around how it's filling coverage gaps with complex connections and difficult to serve premises, and to convert premises passed into service activations. I'm wanting a read from you, please. What target activation do you think is a reasonable one for regional Australia? And can you tell me, please, more about the transparency component of this? What does that look like? What data is missing? And how do you think that can be improved?
It's Matthew O'Rourke. I'll start off here. Look, I don't think we have a position on the preferred target number. Our observation is really that 70% seems unduly low when the benefits from NBN flow from usage, not from simply the number of premises passed. So I think if we want to talk about when NBN is fully operational, in addition to being fully built, we probably should have higher expectations of the appropriate number of activations. It should be north of 70%. On the complex connections, our understanding is that the complex connections are excluded from NBN's targets in terms of what's reported for build complete. And so I suppose it'd be good to have greater transparency there about what those numbers are and what the implications would be for the proportion of activations over premises passed when we start taking into account these complex connections. Look, I think in addition to NBN's role as the statutory infrastructure provider, the newly established responsibility, it'll be building these over the forward period. So it seems reasonable that there should be some sort of accounting for those number of connections.
Thanks, Matthew. Could you just paint for me what you exactly mean by a complex connection and why there would be no transparency about that right now?
I don't know why there's inadequate transparency. I think they've been excluded from the build targets because of the nature of them. So I think some of these might be pair gain systems, which was an old technology to try and get more out of the copper network previously. The sites themselves might be physically difficult to access and serve via NBN, or there might be particularly long copper tails. So there could be different reasons why a particular build is classified as complex.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned in one of your responses earlier around the limitations of fixed line infrastructure to towns of less than 400 people and the locking out of industry outside of those towns. And I wholeheartedly agree with you, particularly when it comes to agribusiness and also to some of our industrial estates in regional areas. Do you have any numbers on this? How many regional sectors may be affected, and how widespread do you think that issue could be?
Look, Andrew Roberts here. I mean, this is what we do. We connect the people who NBN haven't, and basically, I mean, when you look at agribusiness, they don't run their cattle or crop in the middle of a township. It's all done way outside the boundaries of the township that NBN take into account. Going back to your previous question about complex builds. I mean, when you look at regional Australia, you've got to look at these with a different metric in mind. We've got to think about it as corridors or areas of complementary business or complementary residents. I mean, the properties are large. Grazing areas are enormous. Cotton areas and rice areas are all situated around water. I mean, there's different ways we need to look at the economic impact of rolling or costing the NBN to roll into agribusiness, especially. And I think it would be easy to identify the main agricultural revenue sectors across Australia, and look at how we can adopt a statistic where we try to connect these businesses. I mean, these are multi-million-dollar enterprise businesses right down to your family farmers, who all are forced, in the majority of times, to use Sky Muster, which is really a single household solution to operate their business, or a plethora of 4G SIM cards to conduct daily business. And I think it's one of those areas where we've got to look at a different metric on how we can resolve these issues for rural, regional, remote Australia.
Can you elaborate a bit further about what that metric would be? What would that look like?
Look, I think it needs to be done on an economic level, maybe input to GDP, or some metric which is absolutely transparent, where we can identify key areas that it would be advantageous for the federal government to recognise that productivity gains could increase by having adequate connectivity. And again, this still excludes certain areas of Australia, so we need to make sure we don't exclude more people who don't fall into those buckets. But I think we need some sort of metric to say there's businesses and agribusinesses and residents who need this connectivity at a much greater level than what Sky Muster can deliver. And Sky Muster is a two-tiered product, just to be clear. So you've got the residential product and you've got the business satellite service. There's a massive cost difference for the two. So there could be some very interesting things you could do at a pricing level to introduce some more, a different class of service for smaller businesses using the satellite product. But at the end of the day, there are limitations with the satellite product when it comes to the asymmetric nature of the product and the lack of being able to use cloud services adequately. Right?
And it's Vaughan Baker here, just to build on Andrew's comments. Many of these businesses and communities are also prepared to contribute to the cost of their connection. So you're in a crazy situation where it's one size fits all, to Andrew's point, and it goes into the town, into the rural town, and not beyond the rural town. It doesn't necessarily target where everyone lives. And I have seen community-based initiatives in New Zealand that have been incredibly together and connected themselves to New Zealand's UFB network, to essentially the equivalent of the NBN. And they've done it by ways of, getting together as a community, and maybe they may be connecting the marae and Maori populations. So they'll dig the trench themselves. They'll put the implement on the back of the tractor, they'll dig the implement themselves. That's where 90% of the cost is, and then they'll tap in to the NBN infrastructure that's passing by. So I think Australia needs to look at some of these models, to look at how, because the need is there, that people are prepared to contribute towards the cost, but the metric and the one size fits all approach, those two don't align.
And we're generating a whole different breed of service providers as part of the process. So instead of having a single national provider, we've got a handful, and increasingly so, of small people who we can't control their service standards. The service quality is different, and it becomes a mess. I think we need to really think about how we deliver across the board level of service in a coordinated way. And I keep coming back to state governments wanting to get involved. We're seeing that now. State governments are giving councils and communities money to find a provider to go and build a network. we want these to be sustainable, ongoing ventures, not things that last 3 to 5 years and then the farmer that decided to put up the towers gets bored of it, or you know, he loses interest, and it just dies. It dies. These things need to be a national network that continuously grows based on demand.
So would you see that we should be thinking carefully about a revised regulatory framework that may enable PPPs to thrive, but to do so in a way that's clearly of a standard that's future-proof? Is that what you'd be thinking a recommendation of this committee should be?
I think we need to look at the statement of expectations as it relates to regional Australia and really carve out a section that future-proofs how we're going to handle telecommunications in the bush. And this is not a small subject, granted, but you know, the statement of expectations is basically a speed-based metro context. I think we need to look at it and start understanding a context where local governments, state governments can all contribute to a single national network, not developing competing networks of different service standards.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Look, that's all the questions I have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Haynes. We've got a few minutes, so we might share that at the end. My question, if I could, relates to sorry, I'm just getting myself comfortable. Can you explain why you think NBN's entry into the business market is a good thing for consumers and business? I just want to round out on that.
Sure. It's Matthew O'Rourke. I'll pick this up initially. You know, for suppliers who don't have their own nationwide infrastructure, they traditionally had to buy from wholesalers who often be vertically integrated themselves. And so the offerings that can be made, particularly outside of metropolitan areas, are very much limited to the wholesale offers that and the wholesale prices that the wholesaler is prepared to offer. And you know, they can be very limited. You know, the traditional problem of vertical integration and discrimination that NBN was designed to fix arises here as well. So NBN's entry to enterprise markets was really very disruptive, and it's transformational because it provides all RSPs with access to enterprise-grade fibre infrastructure. So there's probably three areas where this has really benefited competition. So the first one is it's increased market access for RSPs, and that market access might be in terms of reaching new geographies with fibre. It might be reaching new customers or new customer premises. So it's really opened up the market for more RSPs to compete. A second benefit for competition has been lower wholesale pricing. So simply put, NBN's entry into the space has seen wholesale pricing from other wholesalers come down significantly. And I think in the order of 30% reductions could be seen from some providers quite quickly after NBN's entry became appreciated. So again, those sort of cost reductions for RSPs get passed on to consumers, to business consumers, in the form of lower pricing. And the third one, the benefit there is probably the reduction in switching costs for business consumers. Once connected to carrier independent infrastructure such as the NBN, switching between different providers becomes a very, very easy prospect, whereas previously switching between different providers might require the construction of new infrastructure. With carrier independent infrastructure, the switching is just like it would be for residential customers between RSPs on top of that. So business customers here have a much greater choice, and as switching becomes easier, they're more inclined to do it more frequently as the need arises, which then makes RSPs compete more vigorously for their business. So I think NBN's entry has really transformed the dynamics of competition in that enterprise market, and those sorts of changes just will roll upon themselves and develop over the long term. So we're very, very firm supporters of NBN's presence in the enterprise space and should remain there.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that detail. I'm going to pass over to Mr. Simmons, who has some questions, and I think Ben needs to leave us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, everybody, for your evidence so far. Look, I just wanted to explore the concept that you've got in your submission, where you talk about the fact that, or posit that, a write-down is both necessary and inevitable. I come from a bit of a finance background, and I note that the NBN Co's financial statements are already subject to independent audit by the Auditor General. That the concept of a write-down is a carefully defined financial instrument. It's not just a will of a political decision that politicians can simply decide to write it down. So from a finance point of view, so I just wanted you to expand for me what you had in mind and what you were trying to achieve with that concept.
Sure, it's Matthew O'Rourke again. Look, there's a few issues here. Firstly, on the there's two different accounting issues that we're talking about. There's the write-down in the financial context, which you raise, and that's very very relevant for statutory accounts and statutory accounting. Separately, regulatory accounting, it can be different and often is different. So statutory accounts don't necessarily need to match regulatory accounts, and this is because the objectives of regulatory accounting serve a different purpose. It serves the purpose of regulation and the various objectives that need to be pursued through price regulation. So regulatory accounting can and often does make different assumptions about the value of assets, of which costs should be excluded or perhaps changed or written down. Regulatory accounting can deviate from accounting standards as well. So there's nothing to preclude a regulatory accounting assumption assuming a write-down for the purposes of price regulation. Now, separately, on the statutory accounting, yeah, absolutely, that's an issue for NBN. I think it's been a short while since I looked at that. I think NBN's conclusion is that a write-down isn't necessary because they value their assets at depreciated replacement value. I suppose the question arises, is it realistic to expect a potential arm's length buyer to pay the replacement value for the different technologies that have been deployed? It kind of ignores the more efficient technologies that are available today if someone was going to build from a greenfield standing start. And those similar assumptions would be made in a regulatory context as well. So, yeah, I think my point is there that there's regulatory accounting can make different assumptions from statutory accounting, so the two should be discussed separately.
Can I just follow that question up? My background is in the criminal law and in particular as a criminal barrister, so I've always believed that motivation is a very powerful force, or motive is a very powerful force. I read that you say a write-down would promote better consumer pricing. At the same time, I'm reading that some of your members have complained about very tight or small margins when retail curtailing NBN services. So I'm a little concerned that what we might see, if we were to see a write-down, that we might end up seeing effectively savings not passed on to consumers, but rather the complaints regarding small margins being satisfied. So is Complete prepared to give a guarantee that any price reductions would be passed on in full to customers?
So in order to get to that sort of guarantee, I think the guarantee comes from stronger competition will always see lower costs passed through to customers, consumers. So a write-down would, look, and I should say, look, I think we did say a write-down's inevitable, and I think in the near term, a smaller write-down would achieve greater pricing flexibility. In the longer term, the write-down would need to be much more substantial. So the longer this issue drags on, the more difficult the decision may become. But what the write-down will enable would be, because NBN gets pulled in these different directions, it needs to be, it needs to recover its costs. It needs to return, make a return on its investment. It needs to provide efficient pricing across Australia. It needs to provide that platform for economic growth across the country, which requires utilisation. So NBN's getting pulled in these different directions. So it probably doesn't have an incentive to address this issue head on, which is why we raised the regulatory prospect. But
Sure.
The write-down of the regulated asset base would mean that the amount of the revenue requirement that NBN would require each year would be significantly lower. And so as a result, the price structure, and we talked about CVC before, the price structure, there'd be less pressure on that to earn all that additional revenue requirement. So pricing flexibility gets introduced at the wholesale level. The price levels themselves will come down as well. And this then stimulates the access, the utilisation, the pricing flexibility of RSPs, the margins of RSPs, the take-up and utilisation. So there are a lot of economic benefits that would spill out if prices were lower. And one way, and a major way of achieving that, is to write down the regulated asset base.
But that's my point. My point on this, if I could, and can I get a direct answer on this? Without an undertaking to pass the saving on to the retail consumer in full, a write-down of the asset base and indeed the need to recover, reduce the need to recover costs and the quantity of it, could in fact lead, without that undertaking, to no change at all on retail prices, and rather be consumed by fatter margins enjoyed by members that compete and others.
It's Vaughan Baker here. Matt, can I just jump in? So it's Vaughan Baker here. So MyRepublic's a business that looked long and hard at the Australian market. And before we came in 2016, there was an NBN at the start of the early part of 2016 that couldn't tell us what premises it served. Right, so just think about that. Right, so it couldn't tell us what premises we could get to. By the end of 2016, they could. So we launched our business. We are only in the Australian market because of the NBN. So we as a member of compete, one of the member organisations, MyRepublic, are here to compete. I'd suggest to you that the loudest voices you see complaining about margin squeeze are the large players that also don't like the competition that NBN presents to it. So there's those. Be very careful. Don't believe everything you read in the press. In the sense that your Andy Penns and co are always going to bleed because they want the NBN in the first place. So absolutely, through competition, you will see product and service innovation, and you'll see price competition, as you have seen to a degree. We're now at a limiting factor. We've now got a CVC charge, which is an arbitrary charge invented by the NBN, replicated nowhere else in the world, right? Simply because they've got to service their debt or their equity investment and repay the shareholder. And they're worried about that. So Matt's absolutely right. This will entertain them to look at the prospect of adopting the model, the charging and pricing model that's adopted by every other NBN in the world, of being AVC only. And then the RSP will have certainty around cost, and then can drive further product and service innovation, and then compete with the big guys, compete with the incumbents, and then maybe they'll change their tune and start complaining about the competition.
Yeah, and look, additionally to that, I think it can't be looked in isolation.
Sorry, go.
No, so I think the write-down, I think, needs to be looked at not in just isolation, because we've spoken about the CVC, but we've got to talk about quality of service, the reach of the network, the future build requirements, the future investment requirements, and how it's all going to mesh together. I mean, if a write-down is done simply for a sale or a future sale, where everything we've spoken about for the last hour and a half is of concern. I think we've got to look at, if we're going to promote this single wholesale network that needs to grow, provide better service, more service at a cheaper price for wholesalers, together with covering more of Australia, we can't look at this in isolation.
Can I just flush this out a bit deeper? So on my analysis, broadband service demand has grown by 37% per annum since 2012. We now have households using the NBN consuming 300 gigabits per month. COVID, obviously, has reinforced the importance of the NBN. Demand is forecast to grow 14% per year to 767 gigabits per month by 2028. I'm just having some trouble reconciling the write-down, because given this growth in demand, why is there a need to write down the network? It's becoming more and more valuable, more and more important with the passage of time, and yet there is a call to write down the value of the asset which has been built to service these needs.
So Vaughan Baker here. That data that you're quoting all has a cost associated with it that the NBN passes on. They've demonstrated by giving us up to 40% free, but there's no extra cost to that data. So that 760 odd gig that you're talking about in 2028, if the same pricing model endures, right, that'll have a massive CVC bill. You watch your retail prices, right? Your competition won't save you. There'll be small providers that'll need to exit the market because they just can't sustain it. And then the big guy will squeeze the little guy out because he's got scale. He'll just loss make for a period of time, it'll all be fine. And then you'll be looking back going, actually, we deployed this NBN, we've still only got 3 or 4 fixed providers. What have we achieved?
Great.
And if I could also, it's Michelle M now, and just taking back to, the original reason why the NBN did come into inception, and the goal was really to give Australians the most dynamic, competitive market in the world from which to buy. And the intention was to have innovative, dynamic, aggressive new retail entrants come in and pitch new, diverse, cheaper products and erode the market share of the incumbents who are defending legacy monopolist margins. We have not seen that today. And, with the new entrants coming in, what we have seen, and for various reasons, what we have seen in the market is having RSPs, one, not being able to connect directly to NBN, again, for economic reasons, and two, really looking at what is their incentive, and can they even really afford to be in the business to sell NBN services? And that was not really the original objective of the NBN and why it came about. The NBN did look to create a level playing field. It did look to increasing new entrants, and the industry, telecommunications industry as a whole, which involves compete members as well as a whole multitude of other members in the industry, to be able to increase diversity and competition for the benefit of consumers and the economy. Now, if there is no incentive for smaller providers or any provider to be able to want to be part of the NBN, I think that is a real risk in terms of what it could really be able to deliver in the future, because we need to try and optimise and incentivise also the industry that supports those technological developments, supports the innovation, supports the offers. And what we have seen, over time is that providers do make public announcements that they wish to exit NBN entirely. So that's small providers because they don't see the incentive, or they wanted to be in the game, but they just can't because their business cases and smaller providers are so much more sensitive, and they don't have the deeper pockets to be able to withstand that over time or commit to the risk of that uncertainty. Now, we've seen smaller providers exit the market, and that who wanted to and had some keen strategies to stay in the market. And that included some compete members as well. And other members in the industry have made announcements that they are selling NBN, but it's not a priority, and that their growth and that their livelihood is dependent on other forms of technology and other forms of services, such as mobile, which is in competition for NBN. So that's also just so that there can be some wallet share and some foothold with the customer, because broadband is so important. But that's also not the original intention of the NBN. So I think we need to put things into context and, not look, the write down is one part of it, but, I think you do need to look at, if you really want the NBN to be successful and to pick up these demands and look at the new products and services that could come about using broadband as connectivity, I think it is important to also look at the business case for smaller providers and understand that that is one of the objectives of this inquiry.
It's Vaughan Baker, just to add to that. We see the potential for a write-down being one of the contributing factors that may potentially assist NBN in adopting a fit-for-purpose pricing model. If there's another way to achieve it, fine. We just see it as potentially a helpful factor that may contribute to us getting a fit-for-purpose commercial model out of NBN.
Before I pass over to Senator Antic, I'll just make the point that I think in establishing the NBN, it was fairly clear that the shareholder investments, and that is the citizens of Australia, were keen from the very get-go to ensure they achieved a return on their investment. Over to you, Senator Antic.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for everyone for the submissions. I'm interested in this issue about the early investment in the NBN. And I think in the submission, you said it was necessary to confront what you described as the reality that that inefficient investment was rolled out in the early years of the NBN. Now, I'm interested in that from the perspective of the timing. Are you referring to the Labor years from 2009 to 2013, when I think it was only $6 billion were spent, and fixed line infrastructure, I think, to around 51,000 premises were rolled out? I just wonder if I could seek some clarification on that subject.
Yes, it's Matthew O'Rourke here. Look, I think the use of inefficient there is really in the regulatory accounting context. So cost recovery in this context should really focus on recovering efficient costs. And as we said earlier, looking at if you were to build something today, you would be looking at modern equivalent assets and best technology to use from this day. So that's where the idea of efficiency comes in. What would be the most efficient technologies? What would be the most efficient cost to deploy today? And that would often be how regulated pricing would proceed on those sorts of assumptions.
And Vaughan Baker, just to add on that, I think rather than Matt's right, it's not a political statement. It's the organisation, the NBN, started off on a certain trajectory with a certain plan, and then it stopped and reset itself, and then started again, and then it stopped again, and then it reassessed itself, and then it started again. Any business that does that, so anyone with from a business background on the committee, will understand the cost that causes an organisation. The stop-start approach and change in strategy. There is a cost associated with that, and that's what we're seeing in the, I don't know what we're up to now, the tens of billions of dollars that have been sunk.
So, okay, all right. So it sounds like a yes then. But do you agree then, since the adoption of the multi-mix technology, the capital investment has been more than efficient? Noting that today, I think 7.4 million premises have been connected, and more than 11.7 million can actually connect, can physically connect. So, is that something, a statement that you would agree with broadly?
So it's Vaughan Baker here. So where the network has failed to improve the quality of service to the consumer, be that SME consumer or residential. So unfortunately, the mixed access technology approach has meant that some people are seeing a vastly superior network performance than what preceded it, and some people are seeing about the same, and there's a group of people that are actually getting worse.
Correct.
And so what's your view then on how efficiencies could have been improved since in terms of the rollout since 2013, if that's the case?
So look, I was interviewed by Jennifer Hewitt a couple of years ago because I was the chief executive of the New Zealand Regional Fibre Group, and she asked, how did New Zealand get it so right and how did Australia get it so wrong? Firstly, I think the PPP was very efficient in New Zealand. So the New Zealand total cost of their network rollout to 87.5% of the population, fibre to the premise, right, for New Zealand. And many people say New Zealand, it's just a couple of islands and it's tiny compared to Australia. But when you actually look at the population density of Australia's cities, it's much more densely populated than New Zealand. New Zealand, nevertheless, is rolling out fibre to the premise to 87.5% of the population to total cost of the taxpayer of 1.25 billion New Zealand dollars. They're doing it because it's recycled. They're doing it because they have appropriate cost. Unfortunately, the costs got inflated of the anticipated fibre to the premise rollout in Australia, and I can, if anyone's interested in that, I sent observers to Tasmania, and I saw the rort that was going on there. It ended up with the estimated cost of $4,500 or $4,400 per premise connected for fibre to the premise. I understand how that came about. It should be nowhere near that. An equivalent cost 10 years ago in New Zealand was 2,700 New Zealand dollars, not 4,400 Australian dollars. And then the recycling of the money. So when the New Zealand wholesalers, the guys that were awarded the contracts, actually rolled out and they finished their build to 75% of the population, they've repaid the funds back to the government. The government said, we don't want the money. What could you do with it? They said, actually, we could do another 12.5%. So yes, the horse is bolted. We are where we are. But there was no need for such significant investment, I think, in Australia. Australia could have rolled out its NBN much, much smarter.
I don't think coalition members would disagree with you, to be honest. But this is where we find ourselves with Senator Antic. Sorry.
No, sorry, Chair. Look, I think that's all I've got. Thank you, Chair.
Well, I just want to, I'm sorry about the disjointed nature of this, it's just the way we allocate time. I just want to move to quickly round out with NBN wholesale service standards, and in particular the call that they be regulated. I'm going to start with an assertion which you can comfortably rebut if you like, but in my view, NBN wholesale service performance has significantly improved. Well, why do I say that? Well, I say it because complaints to the TIO involving NBN fault or connection issues have dropped from a little over 2 cases per 2 complaints per 1,000 active NBN services to 1.25. Right first time installations are up from 87% in June 2017 to 92% in April 2020, and fixing faults within agreed timeframes has improved from 70% in June 2017 to 93% in April 2020. Given this improvement, I struggle to understand why there's a call for a regulated NBN wholesale service standard. I worry that what we will see there is a regulatory regime which impedes the trajectory of the current improvement standards, and noting that those have been achieved without regulation.
It's Michelle Lim here. So I do note and also acknowledge that of recent times there has been considerable effort from the industry, from the government, as well as NBN, in addressing customer complaints and looking at these operational metrics. And as everyone knows, it's been a very well documented and well reviewed area. But that doesn't mean, because the complaint levels that we see today, which have been measured by the ACMA, by NBN, by the TIO, have been reducing, it doesn't mean that we need to drive forward looking in the rearview mirror. And I also don't believe that we can put a stick in the sand today as to what those levels are, and have any certainty that those levels, one, would be the same moving forward, but even whether those are good enough. So in terms of regulation, like I said previously, regulation would be is a not necessarily a path that we would love to take, but I believe that in the situation that we're in, to be able to provide certainty to customers, and for important metrics where we need to have some standard, Compete does believe that regulation is something that we should be looking at moving forward.
I could understand that if the metrics I just indicated were headed in the wrong direction, but there has, by your own admission or concession, there's been significant improvement and it continues. And I just worry that regulation represents, in this case, a solution in search of a problem. But that concludes the coalition members' time. I hand over to Ms Templeman or Senator Griff, given that Dr Haynes has indicated she's exhausted her questions, if they wish to use the remaining 8 minutes.
Senator Griff, have you got a few more questions?
No, look, I'm fine. Over to you.
I've got just maybe just one one question or one topic to touch on. And I'm just looking at my notes. Okay, what about your vision of how service bundling? I asked about the energy service bundles originally. Do you have any thoughts on how service bundling might evolve over the next few years?
Vaughan Baker here. I can talk about it from a residential perspective. So
sure.
As broadband, retailing broadband is increasingly becoming a utility, an essential utility nevertheless. And so what you typically see is, and you're seeing this across the region as well, is that people are increasingly providing additional services. So they're either providing broadband and mobile, or broadband and mobile and energy that you touched on. There's a former member of Compete that was providing mobile and energy, and was providing broadband and exited broadband for some of the reasons that Michelle set out earlier. I think you are going to see that trend. There's some challenges in doing that in Australia. Being one of the people in our business that kind of looks at that is there's no sort of necessarily sort of nationwide retailer because of how the energy sector is set up, unlike Singapore and New Zealand. But it's certainly an area of interest for us as an organisation, and I think you'll continue to see it because bundling is a natural strategy where you've got services that are relatively low margin.
And it really goes to the question of how smaller providers and new entrants will try to differentiate themselves.
Absolutely.
What else might, what is happening elsewhere that we might see here?
The other one's content. But the challenge with content is in a traditional model, it requires very deep pockets to do it. And so you're starting to see the large incumbent telcos invest in content themselves. Spark, the incumbent former Telecom New Zealand, has established Spark Sport and is playing very heavily in that market, but it's got the funds to do so. So challenger, smaller challenger retailers don't have such an ability. So I think what you'll see from them is either the ability to source niche content, or indeed assist people with aggregating their content. So content's another one that's interesting. I also think you'll see people optimize connectivity for the service that's being provided. So, whether somebody's gaming, and now that they're working from home, they're day trading, whether they're video conferencing, and we've had a few issues on the video conferencing, people will start to differentiate their service based on that. So you'll see service differentiation within broadband, and you'll also see additional bundling and stuff that you kind of, energy is an obvious one, but there's other stuff sort of that we're working on in particular in Singapore at the moment.
That's right. And Michelle Moore here, and increasingly you see, unified services running over broadband. You see the video conferencing that we're doing, the streaming, and even today in the video conference call that we've had, we've been over video conferencing, which is over broadband. We've used the video conferencing platform, but we've also used a separate audio bridge and used our mobile connections or landline connections over pure voice to connect through audio today. So, even in this call, we've seen a range of different technologies as well as different services that run over the top, all working to come together to have an actual different approach to how we're doing things, and at the end of the day to communicate. So that's something which I believe is important to consider, not NBN just in isolation, and not broadband just in isolation, or not just utility or gas or electricity in isolation and combining the two, three or four. I think it's the subtleties of the new normal and how things can change lives. But what it does point to in the COVID period, as we pointed out in our opening statement, did point to how the telecommunications industry, where you've got small providers, you've got small niche providers, you've got larger providers, and you've got network owners, really all coming together, and they all play a very important role in able to deliver what would be coming into the future. So I think that's something which does need to be considered, and also the fact that moving forward in terms of vertical integration, there are mobile providers leading with 5G, and those are vertically integrated providers as well. Smaller challengers do not own and operate the mobile service. So that is something which could potentially become a competitive barrier if it's not managed right moving forward, with mobile as well being an important part of the ecosystem of how we all communicate.
So that sounds like a range of challenges. And is there, and this is my last question, are there any other challenges for your size organisations that you see that we haven't touched on?
I would like to point out, and I do appreciate the invitation today on behalf of Compete to the Joint Standing Committee. It's certainly very well received to have the opportunity to come here today and to be able to provide our views, also our concerns on matters. So certainly having a voice where we can provide a different perspective and be able to influence or perhaps even just provide insights to form the decision-making for important inquiries such as this, as well as any other inquiries that are run. So that would be, from a challenger perspective and a compete perspective, that is something moving forward where we hope that we can provide that contribution, and we also hope that that would also then influence and help smaller providers in the market across NBN as well as all the other areas to be able to have a voice, to be able to help determine what would be the best future for the companies.
Excellent. Colleagues, that concludes today's proceedings. With the committee's agreement, answers to questions on notice, and there's been at least a couple, should be provided to the Secretariat by the 18th of September 2020. I want to take this opportunity to thank Ms. Lim, Mr. O'Rourke, Mr. Baker and Mr. Roberts for your evidence today. I also would like to thank Hansard and Broadcasting and the Secretariat for their assistance. While I'm at it, can I thank colleagues for their cooperation and patience. Thank you all. I declare the hearing adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Deputy Chair.
you.